Bonjour. How's everyone doing? Last talk, one of the last talks of ECC. Thank you all for spending the time to learn a little bit more about attestations. My name is Bryce Patrick. I'm a part of the core team of Ethereum Attestation Service. And just for a raise of hands, how many of you in the crowd actually know what attestations are? We got a few. All right, some strong hands in the front. Awesome. So the whole goal of this talk is to help you understand a little bit more about what attestations are, why they're useful, and some of the use cases that we're seeing be unlocked through the use of them. So I'll show you some pretty fun use cases, and at the end, we should have about 5 minutes for questions, and I'll also stick around after to help answer questions. So don't feel like you have to, write down a bunch of notes. We'll be around too. So attestations are simply just a digital signature of some structured data. So it's a really funky term. I'm sure you've heard it kind of like in the legal sense, maybe through academia, when people say, hey, I attest to this, or this person attested to something. That's really where the root term comes from. But in Web3, this is simply just a way to sign structured data using a digital signature. And through that simple method, it unlocks a ton of new use cases for us. So it seems a bit abstract, right? So what is EAS? Well, let's understand really why we built EAS to begin with, and I feel like that really helps everyone understand kind of the importance of it, and then I'll go into some of the use cases. We were noticing that there's a lot of digital identity products in the ecosystem, and just a disclaimer, we're not an identity product, but this is a trend we are seeing in the market. And we're wondering, why hasn't anyone been able to solve digital identity? If we're able to solve that, it can unlock some really amazing use cases like under-collateralized lending, more trusted interactions with people online. And there's no shortage of people that have been trying for, not even in Web3, but in the Web2 sense. And what we notice is that in Web3, the identity ecosystem is extremely fragmented. There's companies like WorldCoin, Proof of Humanity, Gitcoin Passport, Sysmo, Lens, Bright ID, Disco, MasterCard, and the list keeps going on. And to realize, well, as an engineer, we have to keep learning each one of these individual protocols to try to create a comprehensive digital identity, which isn't going to be something that's scalable. And so we're wondering, well, perhaps maybe everyone doesn't really know what identity is, including us, right? And we're wondering, well, what actually was your first identity? And maybe everyone's building one layer too high. At one point in your life, you didn't have an identity, and then you did. So what happened? And we realized, like, okay, well, your first attestation is actually when your mom names you, right? She attested to your name. She said, this is my child, Bryce. And then throughout life, other entities start attesting to different aspects of who you are. The government or the hospital would have attested to your date of birth. You get your identity card from the government. Perhaps it's your driver's license eventually. You go to school and your teachers attest to your grades. You might be attesting to your friends that you like and the friends that you trust. So you're not only receiving attestations but also giving them. You finally get a job. Your employer attests to your employment, to your skills, and then you attest to people that you trust. You might give referrals to people like, hey, I trust this plumber for these reasons, or I like this restaurant for these reasons. And so identity is extremely complex and nuanced. And so what we realize is you can actually represent identity as an aggregate of these attestations over time, but you can't first start with an identity service or protocol because of how nuanced and complex identity is. We first need to start with a base layer where any entity can attest about anything. And so that's what we built. EAS is simply a base layer for making attestations. It's an infrastructure public good, which means that it's completely open source and free to use. And we believe strongly that it had to be a public good and open source because trust, identity, and these types of things are kind of like oil and water. When you add finances to them, one entity is going to try to extract as much value out of an identity protocol as possible. And so we said, okay, if we actually want to solve important things like trust and identity, it has to be open source and free for everyone to use. And then people can build amazing businesses on top of that. EAS is extremely easy to integrate. I'm going to explain just like the structure of it before I go into some of the use cases, but we are live, and I'll explain kind of where in a second. But EAS runs on 2 smart contracts, one for, it's called the schema registry, which allows you to register any data topic. So imagine this event, right? You might think what information is important for an event. Maybe you want to describe the event name, right? And that could be a string. Maybe it's the start time, and it's a uint64, right? You can start to define the different types of data structure, and then the other smart contract allows you to make an attestation on that schema. We also allow you to apply or set a resolver contract on the schema. This can unlock like a lot of amazing use cases, like automatically emitting a payment after an attestation is made. Maybe you have like a whitelist or an allow list of people that are able to make attestations on that schema. Any smart contract logic is possible using the resolver. Our traction has been pretty great as a public good. We were really grateful that we're able to get a lot of the initial traction from a lot of the identity protocols in the space, and also other builders that are making their own attestations just in their own unique way. And so our job was to figure out how we can unite the ecosystem closer together. So Optimism, they were actually building what was called the Attestation Station. Are some of you familiar with that? Awesome. So the Attestation Station, we actually had some great conversations with them. They ended up deprecating the Attestation Station v0 and upgrading to EAS. So EAS will be a part of the core OP stack. We'll have 2 special addresses. So anytime the OP chain gets deployed, EAS will automatically be a part of that. So base inherits it, the public goods network L2 that just launched, etc. And yeah, we're excited to continue building. We just deployed on mainnet March of this year, and since then, we've been really trying to work with anyone in the ecosystem that's passionate about building more trust online. So let's go into some examples. Attestations go beyond identity. So while we were thinking that attestations could help solve for digital identity, we quickly realized that it can be used for much more. Anywhere trust or verification is needed online is where an attestation can play a significant role. I'm going to be going through some examples and highlighting our, it's basically like the ether scan of attestations. It's called EAS scan. But I'll show some like UI examples and then go into the Explorer itself. So when we think about social media, there's simply just a network of attestations that people are making. So when you post something, you're attesting to the post, right? You're saying, this is a statement that I'm making. When people like that post, they're simply attesting that they liked your post. Following, replying, reposting, updating your profile, all these things are simply just attestations. And so this is an example UI of just like basically like a social posting platform. And I'll pull it up here. Gotta find my mouse. Hold on. The mouse is gone. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Can you all see it okay? Let's see. Nice. So each one of these are just simply posts. And I'm going to scroll down to one that has, so here's a post from Tim and a reply. And you can see on this post that there's a comment, a like, and then a reply. If I were to click on this shield, it actually takes me to the on-chain attestation record. This is all on Sepolia, but it's an on-chain attestation record showcasing the unique identifier of the attestation, when it was made on-chain, who posted it, and you'll notice that the decoded data here is the schema. So this is string post, GM, and then there's 2 referencing attestations related to this unique identifier. So those reference attestations are the like and the post. And so if this speaketh UI blows up or it's no longer useful, then people can still leverage that data. But one thing that's important to note is we built EAS to also be an off-chain protocol. So all this that is on Sepolia can also be done off-chain, which has its benefits as well, especially for social apps like this. Another use case is, especially with the amount of AI-generated content today, imagine in 2 to 5 years how crazy that's going to be, where I'm not sure if you all have seen this is on TikTok actually, but it's Tom Cruise where he's actually walking around and it looks just like him, sounds like him. It's very interactive. It's not just like a mouse over, but imagine like people that aren't that savvy with technology today. This video is convincing for me, and it's going to be extremely convincing for many others. So how can creators start attesting to the authenticity of their content? One way to do that is through the use of a digital signature. And so we actually have been building ways to help people hash their content and then attest to that hash on chain. and that gives it proof of existence that it was made by the creator at that time. So an example of that would be, oh, here I can move over. If you go on to EAScan, there's a schema called content hash, but you basically upload any local file, it generates a hash of the file, and then you can, this is an example, this actually wasn't TomCruise.eth, I don't think he has one, but I just changed it in the UI. But so Tom Cruise, imagine he attested to his content, right? This is the hash of that content, and then if someone uploads that same file, they could verify against it, and they know that it actually was a digital signature from Tom Cruise that he actually did post that video. And there's ways that you can do this in a very beautiful UI and to kind of obfuscate a lot of this complexity. But imagine in the future with all this AI-generated content, it's going to be really difficult to know what's real or what's not real. And the biggest defense that we see right now is through the use of digital signatures, and that even includes for historical content. So imagine 10 years from now, the amount of AI-generated content can really influence our interpretations of what history was, because people can manipulate old videos and things like that. So if we started testing to the content today, we actually have a chance to preserve some of the history for our digital content. We built if you're participating in ETH Global Paris, we actually built this UI, this app. It's completely open source in our repo as well, but allows you to attest to people that you met in real life using their ENS. So it's called metirl.org. And you'll see that there's some green check marks here. I'm actually going to, if you want, I'll leave this up here for a second, but if you want to attest that you met me in real life, this uses an off-chain attestation on mainnet. So you're just signing a digital signature saying that we met in person, and then I have the opportunity to go and, oops, sorry, I saw some of you with your phone. If we go to metirl, it's on mainnet, so I'm just going to switch to the network really quick, and you can I can show you a little bit more detail. So I can go to my connections tab, so I'm logged into my .eth here, and there's people who have attested that I've attested to, right? And then others where there's a two-way interaction. So here's Kevin Olson. I attested to him, and then he reconfirmed to me. So if I were to click on this attestation record, it takes me to the Attestation Explorer on mainnet, and this is an off-chain attestation. So you can see this is an off-chain attestation that gets its unique identifier. It was from me to Kevin, and it was created at this time. And the schema was met in real life, and it's just simply a bool field. Okay, and then we actually published it to IPFS to index it on the website, but you can keep these completely off-chain if you'd like, or private. One thing that off-chain attestations don't have is a verifiable timestamp, right? There's no consensus that it actually occurred. So one thing that we added is this way to timestamp an off-chain attestation on-chain. So by doing so, all we do is we take this UID, which is a hash of the entire attestation data, and then you're able to timestamp that on-chain, giving it proof of existence. We also built a Merkle tree approach where you can roll up 1 million of these off-chain attestations and just timestamp them in one batch on-chain, so it's a few bucks. But if you use an L2 network, obviously much cheaper too. There's some pretty cool, these are kind of like meme social graphs, but you can just explore kind of the opportunities around this as well. As soon as we start to have these attestations, we can start to build more of a web of trust of information. So this was actually Kelvin over at the Optimism team. He was, I believe this was during ETH Lisbon. He was attesting to people that they thought were cool, right? And then they would attest to other cool people just to build this social graph network. But it allows you to interact, and I'll pull it up here. But you can start to build these relative trust networks where, based off of the attestations that you care about, you can start to visualize the nodes that are closer to you in this social graph and nodes that are out. So here's the visualization of the social graph. You can kind of see it floating around. These are the clusters of nodes of people who have been making attestations. And you can see that there's a few people in this network where people are actually just attesting to them, right? But they're not attesting to anyone, like this node here. So this is actually Vitalik. So Vitalik was receiving a lot of attestations, but not giving them. And you can start to see people that are kind of connected into this mini social graph. But this is all based off of attestation data of people attesting to each other. So this is what the attestation record looked like. So this was Kelvin attesting to Vitalik. It's just a simple bool field, and then the record. So privacy is extremely important. So this is we built a way where you can actually attest to a bunch of private data on chain in a privacy preserving way by using a Merkle root. So imagine your driver's license, right? You might have a bunch of driver's license information like your first name, your last name, your license ID number, and all these fields. We roll that, so these would be the data leaves or fields, and then we keep hashing it until we get a Merkle root, and then you just attest to the root on chain. And then this is what that, if you use the private data schema, it's just a bytes 32 field, and this is the Merkle root, and then you're able to paste the Merkle leaf against that root to prove that it was a part of it. The value here is that the attestation, the value of the attestation is the person that is attesting. So if this was like a verifier of some documents and they attested to that person, and this could all be done off-chain in a private way, you can verify the Merkle leaf against the root. There's so many more use cases that can be unlocked. So voting, transparent and verifiable voting. We actually had DevFolio. They used us for their hackathons. So the most recent one was ETH Barcelona. And the attestations actually were votes from the participants of the hackathon attesting to the projects that they wanted to win. They aggregated those in a quadratic way and then distributed the funds based off of the attestation. But imagine using attestations as votes for any sort of governance. The authenticity of content, marketplaces, proof of anything. So proof of attendance, right, is simply just one entity attesting that you showed up. And so one idea is like if you were to walk into an event, as soon as the ticket is redeemed, you could receive a proof of attendance attestation, and then from that attestation, start collecting POAPs and other things like that. Compliance, registries of anything, and the list goes on. But there's a lot of really amazing things that are going beyond identity related to attestation, so we're really excited to see what people start building. We are going to be participating in ETH Global Paris, and so these are some ideas that we've suggested to the hackers to start exploring. So social graphs, and it kind of gives you an idea of some kind of quick things that could be built. Ticketing applications, zero-knowledge attestations using EAS plus Sysmo to generate a proof off of the attestation data. Attesting to roles in governance systems using attestations, and much more. So getting started is pretty easy. We have an SDK. We have an attestation explorer that I was just showing you. The schema builder, we built a lot of no-code tools to allow you to easily create any sort of schema and attest with it using the explorer. There's a tremendous amount of documentation, and then we also built GraphQL endpoints for each chain so you can start querying the attestation data as well. This is our Twitter, if you'd like to follow us, just to stay up to date on what's going on. We have about a few minutes, so I'd love to answer some questions, and then if we have some time, I can go into an off-chain example as well. Go ahead. Oh, yeah.
Like, what's the reason you haven't added the revocability into the schema? I mean, it seems like it must be in every attestation must be revocable.
Yeah, that's a great point. So every attestation, if you're the issuer, is revocable. So I'll actually make an off-chain one here so we can see how I'll actually just make a statement and revoke it. So I just want to make a statement. I'm going to click attest. We can have a recipient if we'd like. So Vitalik.eth. Not every attestation needs one, but we can just say GM, right? And then you have the option to apply an expiration time on the attestation. So imagine if you wanted to create an attestation for something that needs to expire. So it could be like time-based access or like a credential that you want to have renew after a year. And then you can reference an attestation to start to build it to be more composable. But I'm going to make this really quick and show you the revocation. But if you're the issuer, you can revoke it. If you're not the issuer of the attestation, you don't have permissions to revoke it. Oh, yes. So you can set whether or not you want the attestation to be revocable or not. And then when you create the schema, you can also control whether or not you want the entire schema to be revocable. Yeah. Good question. while this is loading on Sepolia. So here we go. So now we have the statement, Bryce to Vitalik GM. If it's no longer a GM, then I can revoke it. And we also built a way where you can revoke off-chain as well. So this is an on-chain attestation being revoked, and it just changes the state, so a little bit different than soul-bound tokens, right? You're not burning anything here. You're simply just changing the state of the attestation to show that it has been revoked. This is really important because imagine you've been attested to a role, right, in a DAO or at a community group, and then you change roles or leave, right? Most often, people try to reissue an NFT to show your new role, which is kind of silly because NFTs can be transferred among people. With an attestation, you can still keep that attestation record saying that I had this role until this revocation time, right, or the expiration time, and still show that I've had these roles, etc. So here's the revoked attestation. All this can be done through through code as well. Good question. Another one in the back.
The question, can we revoke an off-chain attestation?
Yes, so let me do that. I'm gonna make an off-chain attestation here. This is just using yo-yo again, just for simplicity, but I'm gonna make this off-chain. And an off-chain attestation is simply just a EIP 712 signature. So I'm signing that with my MetaMask, and it instantly gets created, right? And you'll see in the URI fragment of the URL, this is where everything's encoded. So the server doesn't even know that this attestation exists. So you could actually scan this QR code and it'll decode on your phone without us even knowing. And then the timestamp functionality, I'll do that. And then there's a revoke as well, which basically just changes the state, and we index that that UID has been revoked. But when you timestamp something on chain or revoke it, you're not revealing any data about it. It's just the UID of the attestation. And so you can start to pass these around and store. We don't presuppose where people will store off-chain attestations. You can actually take this off-chain attestation and store it on any network. It could be decentralized storage like Ceramic or some other place. So you can see now we have a verified timestamp, and then if I revoke it, I can attest to the revocation off-chain as well. And this is completely private. No one knows that this attestation existed unless I disclose it to you like I've done here.
Hello. Just wanted to ask what's next on your roadmap?
Oh, I think I was trying to find you up there. So next on our roadmap, so the contracts have been deployed across several testnets, mainnet, etc. And our whole focus is around builder education. So we want to make sure that devs understand that this new primitive exists, because we see a lot of devs instantly default to things like NFTs. And when the only existing solution you have is an NFT, it's kind of like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so we're trying to really change the mindset of a lot of devs that this new primitive exists and that it's more composable, more secure, and things like that. So developer education is where we're focused, and making sure that we continue to improve things like schema coordination and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Hello. Can you show how we can add a custom schema?
Yeah, sure. So on the schemas page, if you go to the chain, you can click create schema, and then we have this no-code schema builder. So if you wanted to create something like an event, you might want event name. And I'm doing this typing kind of like my dad with 2 fingers. So give me a second. So we have event name string, and then you can continue to add new fields. You can turn it into an array, whatever you'd like. You could also do this all through the SDK as well. But we did build a no-code way so you can really quickly start testing these schemas. And then the resolver address, remember, that allows you to add custom logic to the schema as well. So if we click create, then it would add it to the registry, which you'll see on the registry here, just a bunch of different types of data structures that people are experimenting around. So we don't presuppose what people are building, so I don't have as much context on some of these newer ones, but we can make some contextual references here that here's an employer ID that they passed an interview, skills category, and skill level. Then there's some other, like blocking, there's some notification things. So schemas are, the schema itself doesn't really matter as much as who makes the attestation, right? Unless you apply a resolver on the schema. So anyone can make an attestation on the schema. So like this is true schema that we were just using for Met IRL. It doesn't really matter who's attesting because you can index and search for people that, like the entities that you value most that are making the attestation. So imagine like if I were to attest that you passed KYC, doesn't hold any value, right? I'm not a KYC verifier, but if a KYC entity attested on the same schema that you passed KYC, that holds more value.
Thank you for the presentation. How are you thinking about cross-chain like attestations? Say like I attested something on Optimism, but then want to use that attestation on Arbitrum. Like, are you thinking about that? Or yeah.
Yeah, we are. I think a lot of that gets solved in at the aggregation layer, right? The compute layer to see similar attestations across chain, but just like you can't transfer like tokens, right? You have to use a bridge to interact today. You can't mirror attestations on a different network. What you can do is like republish, and off-chain allows you to give you a little bit more control. But if it is made on-chain, we see a lot of, we're partnering with people that are focused more on the compute layer to aggregate the attestation data across chains and then make sense of it to users in a better way. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So is EAS trying to, at least in this UI, trying to make it kind of look like, well, you have a Sepolia Explorer here,
Mm-hmm.
but then you have this off-chain attestation. I mean, it would be great if all the attestations would kind of live in the same space, but I guess.
Yeah, so some of the improvements that could be made is to build like an attestation explorer that aggregates a lot of different types of schemas while displaying some of the chain, but right now, each of the attestations kind of live on their chain. So typically we see a lot of apps being built on one specific chain, and then if there is a different type of schema that they want to reference, then you would just aggregate it using the API. So if someone else is making attestations on a different chain that you would find valuable, perhaps it's for Sybil resistance or something like that, you could reference it just in kind of your own use case. I do agree that there are ways that in this attestation explorer we could start to make it easier to see cross-chain type use cases. Any other?
We have no time, sorry.
He's attesting there's no more time. So I will respect the choice, but we'll be around. We're really excited to see the future of attestations. It's a newer primitive, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback. The ecosystem is starting to finally unite around something pretty powerful for non-financial use cases. So we invite you all to come join us. We're completely open source. We're a public good. You can check out everything, and we're happy to help you through our Telegram and other channels to help you start building. Thank you all.